I saw him every day. How was I supposed to know? I'm not a therapist. He's no different than all of the students I see every single day. I noticed he seemed quieter, but all of these kids are so moody. It's just how they are. He had friends, not thousands, but he had some. I thought it was pretty nice when he gave me that Rams jersey. He knew how much I loved them. I couldn't figure out why he started walking across that busy street across from school, never in the crosswalk. Like he had a death wish or something. That one used to have everyone laughing, until it just kind of stopped and got a lot quieter.
Hello, my name is Ellen Eggert from Kern Behavioral Health and Recovery Services.
And I'm Taja Hunter-Jennings with Kern County Superintendent of Schools.
We're here today to learn about suicide prevention and intervention as required by the new AB 2246 mandate, which became law July 1st, 2017.
More importantly, this training is about how to save lives. Suicide among young people is increasing, yet it is the most preventable cause of death.
We appreciate you being here and your willingness to become suicide aware.
This training is called CLAAS.
CLAAS, and the C stands for Care and Connect.
The L is listen and look for warning signs.
The A is ask about suicide.
The second A is acknowledge students' pain.
And the S stands for seek help. We're going to learn about this model as we go through the training. Okay, so let's talk about some facts and stats about suicide. For ages 10 through 14, suicides have increased more than 150% since 1981. Yet suicide is the most preventable cause of death. More teenagers and young adults die from suicide than from heart disease, AIDS, birth defects, stroke, pneumonia, influenza, chronic lung disease combined. Yet we hear about all of these other things, but we still don't talk about suicide. And again, you're going to hear me say throughout this training, suicide is the most preventable cause of death. Suicide is the second leading cause of death for ages 10 through 24, 12 through 18, ages 18 through 22, and we break that up because that's how those deaths are reported. But it's the second leading cause of death behind accidents. But we can prevent those suicides. In Kern County, those stats are staggering. In 2016, 7 youth under the age of 18 died by suicide. That's 7 deaths too many. Stigma. What is stigma? Stigma has a lot to do with suicide. It's a perceived negative attribute that causes someone to devalue or think less of the whole person. How does that relate to suicide? A lot, because we don't talk about it, and we all have an idea of that. Someone who's thinking about suicide must not be thinking right, or what we would consider crazy. But we know that suicide doesn't discriminate and that anybody could be at risk for suicide. We're going to have a little activity, and we're going to go to our facilitator for this activity. Okay, if you look at this next slide, you're going to see some terms about suicide, and they're all derogatory terms, and they continue with stigma about suicide. Cowardly, took the easy way out, committed. And in the survivor loss community, people don't say the word committed. You'll notice that through this training we say died by suicide, and that's in the loss community and the suicidology community, we say died by suicide. And that's another way that we can stop the stigma surrounding mental illness and suicide. So it's just kind of an aside here that we're talking about. Try to say died by suicide. It's a better way, because committed, people commit sin, people commit murder, and it's just a negative way when we talk about suicide to say committed. We're working with the media to have them try to change their terminology terminology also. So thanks for talking about stigma within your groups. I appreciate that. So now we're going to talk about some myths about suicide, and there's many, many myths about suicide. The number one myth, and I don't know if any of you heard about this, but it's the biggest one. If you ask a young person about suicide, you will cause them to kill themselves. That is wrong, wrong, wrong. You cannot put the idea of suicide in someone's head. If they're thinking about it, it's already there. We know that most people will not come to us and tell us they're thinking about suicide, but research shows if you're non-judgmental and genuine and you ask someone about suicide, they will tell you if they are. You may have to ask more than once, but they're so grateful that someone cared enough and connected with them. Most of the time they'll tell you the truth. So ask that question and you may save a life. So you cannot put the idea in someone's head. And that's been a myth that is perpetuated throughout the years. So that's the one to remember. You can't put it in someone's head. The next myth is suicide happens without warning. What we do know is this: the majority of people who die by suicide talk about it a week or two before they die. But they don't say, oh, I'm going to do this, I'm going to go lie on the railroad tracks. They say things like, pretty soon you won't have to worry about me. Things are going to be different when I'm gone. Everyone would be better off without me. And when we hear a student saying something like this, we need to take it seriously and connect with that student, care enough to get involved and find out what's going on, because 98% of suicides, there are warning signs and people do talk about it. And the fact is, 4 out of 5 teens who die by suicide have given clear warning signs. And we as parents, we as educators, we who work in schools, sometimes get that mixed up with that's a typical teen. And the fact is, anytime we hear suicide or something that maybe we think they might be thinking about suicide, we must take it seriously and ask about suicide. Here's another myth. Once a person is suicidal, they will always be suicidal. The fact is, if a young person gets the right kind of help, they will probably never be suicidal again. So using class, if you show care and concern, look and listen for signs and ask about suicide, they will get the right kind of help and probably, again, never be suicidal. People talk about suicide for attention, and this is another big myth that we think, oh, they're just doing that, so I'll do this or that. People who talk about suicide need attention. We know our students know how to get attention. So if they're at the point where they're talking about suicide attention, we as school employees need to talk to them and find out what's going on. Ask them, you know, I notice you're talking about suicide all the time. Are you thinking about killing yourself? It's that simple. Ask that question and then we can go from there. If they're not, they'll tell us, but we'll never know if we don't ask that question. Now, we also know that 4 out of 5 teens who attempt suicide give clear warning signs. These are warning signs we're going to talk about. Our students are going to tell us about those warning signs. And this is not a comprehensive list. This is some. We know that some students may just have one sign. Others may have many and never think about suicide. So we have to err on the side of caution. If you're ever thinking, I think they might be thinking about suicide, the right thing to do is ask that question. Always err, again, on the side of caution.
So now we're going to look at some warning signs of suicide.
I feel trapped and hopeless.
Making statements about feeling hopeless, helpless, or worthless. Many times we think it's just typical teen talk, but we need to explore statements teens make, show care and concern, and listen and look for signs. To a student who hasn't had life experiences, hopelessness and helplessness can add up to wanting to die.
I'm so depressed.
A deepening depression is another warning sign. We've all had bad days, but if depression lasts longer than 2 weeks, we call it major depression, and intervention is needed. Oftentimes, depression is masked by anger, especially with our young men.
I draw pictures of the different ways I would kill myself.
Preoccupation with death. When a student is constantly writing, talking, listening to music associated with death, they may be thinking about suicide. If they've lost a loved one, that could lead one to thoughts of suicide.
I used to be super social. Now I just stay home.
Out of character behavior, another warning sign. A student who used to be very quiet but now is loud and obnoxious. Another student who maybe was a jokester, now he stays alone all the time. Any major behavior change is something that needs to be paid attention to.
I do drugs and crazy stuff to numb the pain.
Substance abuse. It's a fact. Some students use substances, but we know some use it to escape troubling circumstances. If you notice this, a student might be at risk for suicide.
I don't care about grades or even sports anymore.
A loss of interest in the things one cares about. If you notice a student stops hanging out with friends, stops being a part of things they used to be active in, or becomes less social, that's a cause for concern.
I made a list of the people I want to talk to one last time.
Visiting or calling people one cares about. If it seems like someone is saying goodbye and it seems out of character, this is a big warning sign. Pay attention.
Today, I'm giving my best friend my favorite jersey.
Giving prized possessions away. When a student gives things that are important to them away, materials like jewelry, clothing, mementos, that might be a clear sign that they're thinking about suicide. What we need to remember is that all of these could be signs or none could be signs. We have to care enough, though, to get involved to find out if we are dealing with a suicidal student.
Now, we also know that there's risk factors. Now, these are not warning signs. These are risk factors that might put a student at higher risk for suicide. It doesn't mean that every student who are in these groups automatically are going to kill themselves, but they're at higher risk. So that might be someone who's been affected by suicide. We know that especially our students, if a friend of theirs or someone they know dies by suicide, they're automatically at higher risk. If a student has already been thinking about suicide or they've attempted, they're automatically at higher risk. Perfectionist personalities might be the student, it might be self-imposed, or might be parental pressure to get the best grades, to be the best athlete. And sometimes our students have not lived life like us older people who have, and when they fail, they don't know what to do. And sometimes it could lead to thoughts of suicide. Then we have our gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender, and questioning youth. We know that they have a higher rate of attempts. We don't know if they have a higher rate of suicide. We know that group, if they're not accepted by their parents and their peers, they have definitely a higher rate of attempts. And then we have our youth with disabilities, mental illness, or substance use disorders. Automatically they're in a higher risk group because especially with substance use disorders, most of them can cause depression, anxiety, and other things that go along with being in school and peer pressure. And then we have our students who've been abused, molested, neglected, or traumatized. And we know so many with the ACEs study that so many of our youth have had some sort of trauma in their past that has not been treated, that has not been processed. And then they might turn to substance, there might be mental illness. So the combination of that puts them in a much higher risk group. And then our youth who have experienced homelessness or in foster care are in a much higher risk group. They don't have the support. A lot of times they have the support of the school, but a lot of times they don't have family support, parental support, and that puts them at a higher risk for suicide. So a lot of us work with this type of student or youth, and they're at a higher risk. So knowing these background helps us know that, hey, they're not automatically at risk for suicide, but I need to kind of keep an eye on this type of student.
Nobody noticed, not one person at the school. No teacher, no aide, no coach, not that nice lady in the cafeteria, Or that bus driver who always told me those stupid jokes. I guess nobody cared. At least that's what it felt like right before I did it. When I stopped making everyone laugh, everyone disappeared. Nobody noticed I stopped going to my clubs, like I didn't matter. I couldn't tell anyone how I was feeling. What would they think? I guess nobody could read between the lines of my poetry. You'd think my 3 favorite adults at the school would have said something when I gave them my special stuff, but nobody did. Why didn't anyone see my pain? If only someone would have asked.
Something to remember, you may be the first and last person to see these signs in a young person. So this is where class comes in again. Care and connect. As a school employee, you already care about your students. But if you see something out of the ordinary that's not typical student behavior, we have to connect with them, find out what's going on. So care and connect, and then listen and look for warning signs. That student that we just heard, they had some warning signs, definitely. Did you hear them? If you saw a student doing those things, talking about those things, that would be the time to note those items and think, I need to do something about this. And where do we go from there? We've cared and connected. We've looked and listened. Now we're going to get down to the nitty-gritty, the scary part. We have to ask the suicide question. Brings butterflies to your stomach. It's scary. But again, if you don't ask it, nobody will. Why is that question so hard to ask? What if they say yes? What if they get angry? We have to ask the question, because this is a matter of life and death. So how do we ask that question? We don't want to beat around the bush. We don't want to say it in a cute way. We want to say it straight up. Are you thinking about suicide? Are you thinking about killing yourself? We don't want to, are you thinking about hurting yourself? Because with our youth, that might be a totally different ballgame. Cutting, erasing, burning, that's non-suicidal self-injury. That's a total different training. So we don't want to do it that way. We have to ask in a straightforward way, because if we ask any other way, we might get an answer that is ambiguous. So asking that question, and it's scary, I still get butterflies, so remember, asking it straight up, no other way. And sometimes for some people it is so scary to ask, they can't ask that question. If you can't, but your gut is telling you, I think they're thinking about it, find somebody who can ask that question, because you don't want regrets in the morning. I have asked at times when people think, why'd you ask that? I've been wrong more than once, but I like to sleep at night. So I ask that question. It's a scary, scary question. Probably the scariest question and the hardest question you'll ever ask somebody in your life. But again, if you don't ask it, nobody will. We're going to see a couple role plays right now between a school employee and a student. And they're going to show what happens if a student answers in a couple different ways. And we're going to discuss how we would handle that as a school employee.
Hey Ash, how are you?
I'm good.
Sure? You haven't seemed like yourself lately.
No, I'm good. Just tired.
You're usually so outgoing, bubbly. Sure you're okay?
Yeah, I'm fine.
I'm really concerned about you. I care about you so much, and I need to ask you something that might be a little bit scary for you, but are you thinking about suicide?
No, not at all. Suicide? I've just been super busy and everything's just getting caught up with me.
So, we've asked about suicide. You saw the school employee there ask, and Ashley said no. So do you just walk away? Of course not. As a school employee, we're going to support her. Ashley's having a hard time. So we'll find out how else can I help you? Depending on who that school employee is, we may take them to the counselor. We may just stay and sit with and listen to that student. Maybe that's all they need. But you ask the question.
Are you thinking about suicide?
No. Are you gonna report me? Do you think I'm crazy?
What if the answer is no, but you don't feel comfortable with that? You're not quite sure you believe that. Maybe you're just not sure. What do you do then? Well, you're not going to just say, I don't believe you. Keep talking to Ashley. Maybe she's not comfortable with you. Maybe she's not 100% sure that she can trust you. Keep talking to her. Remember, she wants you to ask her the question. She wasn't comfortable coming up and telling you. People want us to ask them the question. Keep talking. Keep developing that rapport with her. If she's suicidal, chances are she's going to tell you. She wants to make sure you care about her and you're genuine. Keep talking to her. I've asked that question thousands of times, and I've know if I stay with that person in their pain, they will eventually tell you. Let's go to the last one.
Are you thinking about suicide?
Yes, I am. I just want the pain to stop.
Did you see there? Ashley said yes. What do you do now? That's scary. You don't want to turn around and walk away. Stay with that person. Acknowledge that student's pain. This is a scary place to be because you're talking to someone who doesn't want to live anymore. They want to take their own life. This is a scary, scary place to be. But you've asked that question, and you may have just saved a student's life. Stay with them. Tell them, thank you for telling me. I want you to live. I'm sorry you're going through this. That took a lot of courage for you to tell me that. I care about you. And that student knows that. And you may be the only person they ever tell that to. So handling this in that positive, I care about you way is going to keep that student alive. Seek help. Remember, you don't have to solve this student's problem. The only thing you need to do is to ask that question. Don't leave the student alone. Now, each of your school has different protocols. You may have a mental health person on campus. You may have the person on campus that deals with this situation. It might be your suicide prevention coordinator, the mental health person. Each of your schools is differently, so I can't tell you exactly who you need to go to. But that's where you do the warm handoff to the person in your school, the designated person that will go from here. You asked the question and you saved life. But there's something we need to remember. Don't ever betray that student's trust. This isn't lunchroom banter. This isn't something where you go and say, oh, guess who is thinking about suicide? This student trusted you with his or her deepest, darkest secret. This is not something that you're going to go tell everybody about. This is huge, and they trusted you enough to tell you about life and death. So remember, this is confidential except for who you passed this on to. So you ask that question. So, you did class. That easy. Let's go over it one more time. Care and connect. Listen and look for warning signs. Ask about suicide. Acknowledge student's pain, and seek help. We can all remember that, right? So, we're going to have an activity. I'm going to turn this back over to our facilitator, and we're going to practice asking about suicide. I want you to remember, be the one to ask the question, because chances are, if you don't ask the question, no one else will. There's no harm, there's no foul in asking the question. You asking the question may be the difference between life and death. You remember class, connect and care, look and listen, ask the question, acknowledge students' pain, and then seek help. Pretty simple right there. Remember, it's all on your hands right here. It's in your hands to save a life. I want to end with a story, pretty simple story, but it boils down that all of us can save a life just by caring. And I think that if you work at a school or you work in a school district, you must care about our future, our children. There was a young man, he was walking home one day from school. It was a Friday afternoon. It was raining. It was raining hard. And he had all of his locker stuff. He had books, binders, pencils, papers. And he didn't have a backpack. He just had it all in his arm. And he was walking and he tripped. And all of his papers fell, books, all over the street, all over the sidewalk. And he bends down, he's kind of cussing to himself. And everything's getting muddy and wet. And people walk by, nobody helps him. So he starts picking it up and, you know, it's all over the place. And he's pretty upset. Nobody helps him. So finally this young man jogs by and he says, "Hey, let me help you pick that up." He says, No, I got it." And he says, "No, let me help you." So he does. He says, "Hey, you're in my 6th period PE class, aren't you?" And he says, "Yeah." He says, "How do you like our school?" He said, "Nah, it's okay." He said, "I've only been here about 6 weeks." He says, "Yeah, okay." So he says, "Dude, why do you have so much stuff? We never have this much homework on a Friday night." And he says, "I have some extra credit I need to catch up on." He says, "Cool." So he says, "Where do you live?" He said, "Just about 5 houses down." He says, "Gosh, you got a lot of stuff." So they're picking it up and it's muddy and they're both getting mud on themselves, but they get it all together and they're walking. He says, "Hey, you play video games?" And he says, "Yeah." And he says, "I'm jogging over to GameStop. You want to go?" He says, "No, I'm good." So they get close to the house. He says, "Hey, I live right here." He says, "Man, I'm jogging over to GameStop. Just go with me." And he says, "No, I'm cool." So they get all the stuff, put it in the house, and they're both muddy. And he says, "Hey, I'm buying a new video game and I want to play with somebody. Just go with me." Okay, he goes. Fast forward 3.5 years, this young man who is taking all of his stuff out of his locker home is the valedictorian at high school graduation. And he gets up and he says, "Before I start my speech, I want to thank my best friend here for saving my life." And his best friend's like, "What?" He said it was a Friday afternoon. He said it was raining cats and dogs outside. And he said, "I had all my locker stuff and I tripped and I dropped everything and everything was in the street and on the sidewalk and it was getting muddy." And he said, "People walked by. No one helped me pick up my stuff." I was pretty upset. And he said, this guy walked or jogged by and he said, "Let me help you." And I didn't want him to because I was so angry, but he helped me. He cared enough to help me pick up everything. And he started picking it up. And the reason I had all my locker stuff is because I was on my way home to kill myself. And I didn't want my mom to have to clean out my locker after I died. And so we got it all together and he kept insisting I go to GameStop with him, but I didn't want to go to GameStop because I wanted to kill myself before my mom got home from work. So he wouldn't get off my back, so I went with him, and when I got home, my mom was home from work. And I went upstairs and something was different. I don't know what it was, but I stayed awake all night and it was hope because he cared enough to take the time to help me pick up my books. So I stayed awake all night and something told me I had to tell my mom what was going on, and I did. And I got help, and I'm here, I'm the valedictorian because he cared enough to help me pick up my books. So I challenge all of you in this room. I know you care, but we can make a difference in someone's life. Go to the mall and smile at everybody you see. Open the door for an old lady like me. That homeless guy, it's not about this, it's about this. How are you doing? You know, we're so connected this way, we're not connected anymore. So let's take the time with each other. Whether it be a student, a friend, your spouse, your child, and let's take a little more time to care about each other. You may save a life and not even know it. So ask that question, use class, and save a life, and do something that might make all the difference in someone's life. Thank you.